When my daughter stole my bank cards, I did something no mother should ever have to do. I smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile that comes from joy or pride or even strength. It was the kind of smile a person makes when their heart is breaking, so loudly that even their breath feels like a betrayal. I felt that if I didn't stretch my lips into that weak, trembling smile, I would begin screaming, and I wasn't sure I would ever stop. It was early morning, the kind of morning where the world is too quiet, too still, as if it knows something painful is about to happen. The sun had only just begun to push its way through the thin curtains in my small living room, painting gentle stripes of gold on the floor. I was sitting on my old wooden chair near the window, the same chair I had sat in through so many seasons of my life, through laughter, through grief, through loneliness, holding a mug of leftover tea from the night before. The tea had lost all warmth, but I drank it anyway because it gave my hands something to do, something to hold, something to anchor myself with. And then my phone buzzed once, then again, then repeatedly, like a small alarm bell trying desperately to warn me. I picked it up slowly, expecting maybe a promotional message or some random notification, but instead I saw the first bank alert: money withdrawn. Then another message: more money gone. Immediately followed by another, and another, each one hitting me harder than the last. With every vibration of the phone, I felt my heart sink further into a darkness I wasn't prepared to enter. At first, the logical part of my mind tried to fight the rising panic. Maybe it's a bank error, I told myself. Maybe someone hacked into my account. Yes, that must be it. Maybe a glitch. Maybe something else. Anything else. Anything but the truth I wasn't ready to see. I clung to those excuses for a few seconds like a drowning person clings to a floating piece of wood. But as I opened the banking app and watched the balance shrink right before my eyes, watched the little numbers fall like drops of blood, I felt my hands begin to tremble uncontrollably. My throat grew tight, my breath turned shallow. Without thinking, I reached for my purse. My fingers dug through every slot, every small zipper, every hidden pocket where I usually keep receipts or small coins. And then I felt that nothing. The cards weren't there. I checked again, more urgently this time, my hands shaking harder as I emptied the purse onto the sofa, scattering tissues, keys, pens, old bills onto the cushions. But the cards were gone, completely gone. I stood up and looked around the house, my eyes scanning every corner as if the cards might magically appear somewhere. Everything was exactly where I had left it. Nothing was broken. Nothing was missing except the two items that mattered most in that moment. There were no signs of a break-in, no windows forced open, no drawers rifled through, nothing disturbed. It was as if someone had slipped in like a soft whisper, taken what they came for, and left without even touching the air. But only one person had been inside the house that morning. Only one person had the opportunity. Only one person had access to my things, not as an outsider, not as a stranger, but as someone who belonged here. My daughter, my only child, the child whose heartbeat I once listened to before she was even born, the child I carried through storms and long nights and the cold years after her father died, the child I raised alone, stitching life together with tired hands and teary prayers, the child for whom I skipped meals so she could eat, for whom I sacrificed sleep so she could dream, for whom I worked double shifts, triple shifts, any shifts, just to keep her safe, warm, fed, educated. The child who once held my hand and told me she would never leave me behind. The child who once promised she would grow up and protect me the way I had protected her, and yet she stole from me. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't even let myself think too much, because I knew if I opened that door inside me, the pain would come out like a flood. Instead, I slowly lowered myself back onto the wooden chair, placing my shaking hands on my knees to stop them from trembling. My lips curled into a tiny, broken smile. It felt strange, almost unreal, like someone else was moving my face for me. Because in that exact moment, something soft, something old, something wise, something deep inside me whispered words I didn't fully understand. You are not the one being betrayed. She is the one being watched. And for a reason I couldn't explain, those words felt true. They felt heavy. They felt like they came from somewhere beyond just my own thoughts, like life, fate, or God himself was watching her choices unfold and allowing the consequences to write themselves in a language only life understands. I closed my eyes, breathed slowly, and whispered into the quiet room, "Dear God, please guide her, not protect her from consequences, not undo what she had done, not save her from pain, but guide her." Because whatever path she had stepped onto, she wasn't ready for it. I could feel that as clearly as I felt my own heartbeat. I rose from the chair, feeling older than I had felt in years, and walked slowly toward the kitchen. The cold tiles beneath my feet almost stung, grounding me, reminding me that this wasn't a nightmare. This was real. And yet, even in that moment of betrayal, fear, confusion, the mother in me still worried for her. A mother always knows when her child is in danger. A mother knows when her child is hiding something behind forced smiles and quick excuses. A mother knows when darkness is no longer around her child but inside her child, growing quietly like a shadow she cannot touch. But this time, it was different. This time, the danger wasn't a friend, a stranger, or a mistake. This time, the danger was something far more frightening: my daughter's own choices, her own loneliness, her own desperation, her own silent battle that she didn't know how to fight. And I had no idea that what she stole from me that morning, those little plastic cards, was nothing compared to what she was about to lose. Nothing compared to what life was preparing to teach her. Nothing compared to the storm that was already moving toward her. Unseen, unstoppable, waiting for the exact moment to break open above her head. Before everything crumbled beneath our feet, before trust cracked like thin glass, before I ever imagined my own daughter could take something from me, not with permission but with quiet, secretive hands, our life was simple, not perfect, not luxurious, not the kind of life that people look at with envy, but simple in a way that felt safe. The kind of simplicity that made ordinary days feel warm, predictable, and quietly comforting. I lived in a small 2-bedroom house on the edge of our old neighborhood, a place that smelled of childhood, of shared memories, of festivals that lit up the streets, and of monsoon evenings that soaked the earth until the entire lane became muddy and slippery. Everyone knew everyone there. Doors were rarely locked, and neighbors borrowed sugar with the same ease they offered gossip. Children played cricket in the middle of the street until someone's mother shouted for them to come home. The walls of my home, painted a soft cream, held our lives in them. They were decorated not with expensive art or modern decor, but with framed photographs I had taken over the years, photographs that captured Alina's first day of school, her shy smile with missing teeth, her awkward teenage years when she stood too stiffly in pictures, the glowing pride in her eyes at her graduation, and even the blurry selfies she would take on my old phone just to annoy me. Every corner of the house held something of her, some memory she had left behind, like a footprint frozen in time, and every time I walked past those walls, I felt a sense of peace, knowing that everything I had done, every decision I had made, had been in the name of raising her. My daughter Alina was the kind of child who made motherhood feel both exhausting and beautiful, smart, sharp, ambitious, and fiercely independent. She carried a light inside her that made me believe she would grow into a woman strong enough to stand against storms. When she was younger, she used to sit beside me on the veranda, twisting strands of her hair around her finger, her eyes shining with dreams far too big for our small world. "Amy," she would say with a kind of innocent confidence that only children possess, "one day I'll give you everything you never had." And I believed her because she spoke with such sincerity, such certainty, that I felt her words settle deeply inside my heart like soft seeds waiting to grow into something beautiful. She didn't just talk about dreams, she worked hard for them. Even as a child, she had a determination I admired. Her father, my late husband, used to say she inherited his stubbornness and my softness, a dangerous combination. He would joke, because such children either conquer the world or fight endlessly within themselves. But he adored her. He adored us both. Life, however, has a cruel way of taking things before we are ready. When Alina was 10, her father suffered a sudden heart attack. One moment he was laughing at something on television. The next moment, There was a loud, heavy thud in the bathroom. I ran to him, calling his name, shaking him, begging him not to leave me, not to leave our daughter. But the silence that followed was deeper than anything I had ever known. The duck wrote the time of death with the same calmness someone uses to sign a grocery receipt. I held his cold hand and knew life would never be the same. After that day, it was just the two of us, me and Alina, against the world. I became both mother and father, strength and comfort, discipline and softness. I worked morning shifts at a tailor shop, stitching clothes for people who barely noticed my existence, and evening shifts at a small bakery, kneading dough until my fingers felt numb. I came home every night exhausted, smelling of flour or thread. Depending on the day, sometimes so tired my legs trembled. But every single night, without fail, when I pushed open the door, I would see Alina sitting at the small dining table, her homework spread out in front of her, waiting for me. "Amy, I heated food for you," she would say in that sweet voice of hers. And those small words, so ordinary, so simple, were enough to push away the heaviness of my entire day. She grew into a young woman with grace, intelligence, and quiet resilience. She studied hard and became one of the first girls in our extended family to attend university. I remember the day she got her admission letter. I held it in my hands for so long that the edges began to bend, and tears dripped down onto the paper. I was proud. Beyond proud. She was fulfilling the dreams that had once belonged to both her father and me. But life has a strange way of changing people. Change is rarely loud. It rarely announces itself. Sometimes it creeps in slowly, quietly, the way shadows lengthen at sunset. Sometimes it happens so subtly that you don't even realize something is slipping away until you finally look up and the person you once knew is already far from you. For Alina, it started with tiny shifts that seemed harmless. When she moved into her hostel, she entered a world vastly different from ours. She met new friends, girls with glossy hair, expensive phones, trendy clothes, and confidence built from growing up surrounded by privilege. They were not bad people, not at all, but they lived lives my daughter was not prepared for. They talked about vacations abroad, high-end brands, weekend trips, and technology that costs more than my monthly salary. Their world was shiny, fast, beautiful, and utterly unreachable for someone like us. But my daughter began to want that world first. She stopped calling every day, then every week. Then she only called when she needed money or something important. Whenever I asked if she was all right, she would laugh a light, careless laugh that didn't fit the girl. I raised and say, "Emmy, relax. I'm just busy." But her tone had changed. Her words had become shorter, sharper. Her visits had grown rare. And when she did come home, she seemed distracted, her eyes always flicking to her phone. She smelled of expensive perfumes, but always insisted someone gifted them to her. She wore clothes I knew she couldn't afford. And when I gently asked where they came from, she would answer too quickly, too defensively. One day she walked in wearing a thin gold bracelet. Not real gold, at least. Not the kind of gold we could afford, but fancy enough to look expensive. I asked her softly, "Bida, where did you get this?" She inhaled sharply and said, "Oh, a friend gave it to me," her voice light but her eyes avoiding mine. That was the first time I saw it clearly in her eyes, a hunger. Not a hunger for learning or achievement, not the hunger for better opportunities, but a hunger to fit in, a hunger to belong to a world that was not built for her, a hunger to be seen, valued, admired, for reasons she didn't fully understand yet. Around the same time, I found a luxury perfume bottle in her bag. Again, she said it was a gift. That same month, she asked me for extra money. Not for books, not for supplies, but for something important. She looked stressed when she asked, her eyes darting around, her fingers tapping nervously on the table. I gave her what little I had because I trusted her, because she was my daughter, because I thought love was enough to keep her grounded. I didn't know then that trust can be fragile, delicate. It can break silently without a sound, like a crack running across glass, so quietly that you only notice it once. The whole thing shatters. Then came the day. She lost her job at the call center she had joined for extra income. When I asked gently why they let her go, she snapped, "Because my supervisor is stupid." Her tone was harsh. Unlike her, I knew there was more to the story. Mothers always know. but I let it go, thinking she was stressed, overwhelmed, trying to adjust to a new phase of life. I convinced myself she was young, that mistakes were natural, that she would find her way back eventually. But deep in my heart, I felt that the air had changed. Something in her had shifted. A darkness had begun forming around her, but she didn't see it. She thought she was walking toward a brighter place, but she was inching closer to the edge of a cliff, step by step, unaware of how close she already was to falling, and I, without realizing, was being pulled toward that cliff with her.
It began with little lies, tiny, almost harmless lies that slid into conversations like uninvited shadows, brushing against my heart so gently at first that I convinced myself I imagined them. Lies that any mother might excuse if she desperately wanted to believe her daughter was still the innocent, soft-spoken child she used to be. The first lie was small, something so simple that I told myself I was overthinking. She said she was staying at a friend's house to study late, and I smiled through the phone, imagining her surrounded by books, sipping tea, her hair tied back like she used to do during exam season. Until I bumped into a neighbor later that evening who casually mentioned she saw Elena laughing loudly with a group of girls at a cafe, her phone held high as she posed for pictures. I swallowed the truth and tucked it behind my ribs like a thorn I hoped would dissolve on its own. The second lie came when she asked for money for a class project. I remember her voice sounding rushed, impatient, irritated even, as if explaining herself to her own mother was a burden. I gave her the money because that is what mothers do give, even when their hands are empty. A week later, while folding her clothes, I found new shoes hidden in her bag, a shiny, expensive pair that didn't look like they belonged to our kind of life. I remember sitting on the bed with the shoes in my lap, staring at them like they were a clue to a puzzle I didn't know I was being forced to solve. I whispered to myself, "She's young. She wants to look good. It's normal," trying to bury the growing ache inside me with excuses that tasted like lies I told myself. But something deeper was shifting, quietly, invisibly, until one day the tone of her calls began to change. They weren't warm anymore. They weren't filled with laughter or the little updates she used to share. Instead, they came fast, urgent, demanding. "Amy, can you send me money? Amy, I need it urgently. Amy, don't ask questions, just send it." The word Amy used to sound like a hug, but slowly it began to feel like a command, a door she opened only when she needed something. I was earning just enough to hold our lives together, working long shifts that left my back aching and my fingers numb, but every time she asked for money, I found a way. I cut down on medicines. I ate less. I walked more instead of taking the bus. Every rupee felt heavy, but I gave it anyway because my love for her was heavier. Yet every time she withdrew money, she withdrew a little bit of me too. One day, when she called and I hesitated for the smallest moment, she snapped with a bitterness I had never heard from her before. "You never support me. You act like you're the only one struggling." Her words hit me like a slap, not because she was angry, but because she truly believed I didn't support her, after everything. I held the phone to my ear, stunned, letting her anger spill into the silence while my heart folded into itself like a fragile leaf burning at the edges. That week, I worked extra hours. I remember standing at the bakery kneading dough with hands so tired I could barely lift them, yet thinking only about sending her enough money so she wouldn't struggle. I saved coins like they were diamonds, slipping them secretly beneath the mattress, counting them over and over in the dim light of night. And then she came home unexpectedly. She walked in quietly, as if afraid the walls themselves might ask where she had been. Her clothes were wrinkled, her hair messy, and her eyes, oh, her eyes looked lost and scared, like a child who had wandered too far and realized she didn't know the way back. She sat on the edge of the sofa and whispered, "Amy, do you still have savings?" My heart tightened like a fist. "Savings? Why?" I asked gently. She didn't answer immediately. She simply looked away, swallowed hard, and repeated, "Just tell me." Her voice trembled. I said yes. I didn't tell her how small those savings were, how many years of sacrifice were wrapped inside them, how each rupee carried the memory of a skipped meal or a sleepless night. She didn't ask how much. She just nodded, stood up, and disappeared into her room. That night, I heard soft crying through her door, muffled sobs she tried to hide. I stood outside the door with my hand lifted, wanting to knock, wanting to comfort her like I used to when she was little. But I didn't. Something inside me told me she wouldn't open the door even if I tried. She had built walls around herself, tall, cold, unreachable walls, and I had no idea how to climb them anymore. Days passed slowly, tense like the air before rainfall. Then one afternoon, while putting away laundry in her room, I opened her drawer and froze. There, lying among her scarves, was a pack of cigarettes. My hands shook as I touched them. My daughter didn't smoke, or at least she didn't used to. I placed them back in the drawer quietly, closing it as gently as if closing a wound. I stepped out of her room feeling something heavy settle inside my chest, a realization that the storm wasn't coming, it was already here, and I was standing in the middle of it without shelter. Then came something I feared even more, the boys, the late-night texts, the calls she hid from me, the sudden mood swings, the nights she stared at her phone with a smile, followed by moments where she looked like she wanted to throw it away. I'd see her sitting on the sofa, screen glowing on her face, her fingers trembling slightly as she typed. Sometimes she laughed. Sometimes she wiped her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking. One night she left the house at midnight, brushing past me with a cold, "I'll be back soon." She returned at 3 a.m., her hands were shaking. Her face was pale, her breathing uneven. I asked softly, "Where were you?" Hopping, she would tell me, hopping she would trust me enough to let me into her pain. Instead, she snapped, "Stop controlling me." The words broke something inside me, not because she shouted, but because her voice cracked at the end, betraying the fear she was trying so hard to hide. I whispered gently, "I'm just worried." But she cut me off, tears pooling in her eyes though she refused to let them fall. "Well, don't be. I'm an adult," she said, but her voice trembled, and adults don't tremble like that. Adults don't come home shaking. Adults don't hide bruises under long sleeves, pretending they don't hurt. Adults don't sit alone at 2 a.m. staring at their phones like the world is falling apart. Something was happening to her, something she didn't know how to escape from, and I couldn't reach her, even though she was living under the same roof. I wanted to confront her. I wanted to grab her hands and pull her into my arms and say, "Tell me everything, I'm here, I'll fix it." But mothers know, when a child is running toward darkness, grabbing them too hard only makes them run faster. So I waited. I prayed. I watched silently as the cracks grew bigger, spreading across her life like spiderwebs. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the night she took my bank cards. Because that was the night everything snapped open. That was when the truth finally spilled out, not like a confession, but like a wound tearing itself apart, revealing layers of pain far deeper than I ever imagined. That was the night I realized my daughter wasn't just lying, or struggling, or lost. She was drowning, and she had dragged my world down with her without even knowing it. It happened early in the morning, the kind of morning where the air feels heavy even before the sun rises, as if it already knows something terrible is about to unfold. She came home just as the sky was turning gray, the faintest light creeping along the edges of the windows. Her footsteps were uneven, slow, and exhausted. When she pushed open the door, I smelled smoke on her clothes, stale, sharp, and unpleasant, and beneath it, a faint scent of cheap perfume mixed with something bitter, something like fear. I looked at her, wanting to ask where she had been, who she had been with, why she kept drifting further and further away from me like a small boat loosening its anchor and disappearing into the fog. But I didn't ask a single question. I simply walked back into the kitchen, reheated the leftover paratha, placed it on a plate, and gently pushed it toward her. "Eat something, Beta," I said softly. My voice cracked just a little, but she didn't notice. Or maybe she did. Maybe she was too tired or too numb to care. She didn't reply. She didn't even lift her eyes to look at me. She just sat there for a moment, staring blankly at the wall, then got up and walked to her room, shutting the door behind her with a quiet, tired thud. That sound echoed in my chest longer than it lived in the hallway. Later that afternoon, I left for the tailor shop. She stayed home, curled up in her exhaustion, wrapped in whatever nights she wasn't telling me about. I remember hesitating at the door, wondering whether to peek into her room and check on her, but something inside me whispered not to disturb her, not that she would want me to anyway. When I returned home in the evening, I felt it instantly. Something was wrong. It wasn't something I saw or heard or even smelled. It was something I felt the moment I crossed the threshold. A heaviness clung to the air, settling in the corners like dust after a collapse. It felt as if someone had walked through the house while I was gone and taken more than objects. They had taken the peace, the quiet, the softness of the home I worked so hard to keep together. I went to my room to put down my bag, opened my purse to take out the small grocery list I had tucked inside, and froze. A cold shock rushed through me, freezing my spine, numbing my fingertips. My cards, both my bank cards, were not there. At first, my mind refused to accept it. I stood completely still, blinking as if my eyes were lying to me. Then panic grabbed me by the throat. I emptied the purse, every pocket, every corner, even the hidden zip that I rarely used. Nothing. I checked the side table, the cupboard, the drawer under the bed, the kitchen shelf, the living room cushions. I even checked the empty pockets of clothes I hadn't worn in months. Nothing. My heartbeat felt uneven, louder than my thoughts. Then my phone buzzed. I wiped my palms against my clothes and picked it up. 4 messages from the bank. Withdrawn, 15,000. Transfer, 8,000. Online purchase, 6,000. ATM withdrawal, 10,000. Each message felt like a blow to my chest, each number draining not just my money but years of sacrifice, hours of extra shifts, moments of pain I endured just to save a little bit for emergencies. One after another, the alerts came, and I sat there in silence as the money disappeared like water leaking from a cracked pot. Someone wasn't just taking my money. They were draining my life drop by drop, breath by breath, leaving me gasping. I rushed to her room. It was empty. Her bed was messy, the blanket half fallen to the floor, her clothes scattered on the chair like she had left in a hurry. Her scent was still there, her perfume lingering in the silence of the room, but she was gone. Gone with my cards, gone with my savings, gone with a trust she didn't even realize she was breaking. I sat on her bed and looked down at my hands resting on my lap, hands that had cooked for her, cleaned for her, worked endlessly for her, held her through nightmares, wiped her tears when she was little. Now those same hands trembled as the truth settled on me like cold rain. She took them, I whispered to myself, my voice small, fragile. The realization struck deeply, not because of the money, not because of the theft, but because of the meaning behind it. The betrayal wasn't in the act of taking my cards. It was in the fact that she didn't come to me, didn't trust me, didn't talk to me. She chose to take rather than ask. She chose to lie rather than cry in front of me. The girl I raised alone, the girl I protected with every breath, the girl I sacrificed my youth, my comfort, my dreams for, that girl had looked at my struggle, seen it, known it, and still decided to betray me. I waited for her until nightfall. Hours passed with the slow ticking of the wall clock, each second stretching into a lifetime. At 10 p.m., she came home. Her face was pale, almost white. Her eyes were red, swollen from crying. Her hands were shaking as if she had seen something she couldn't forget. She stepped inside, and I could barely recognize her, not because of how she looked, but because of how lost she seemed. "Where were you?" I asked gently, not accusingly, not angrily, just softly. She didn't answer. She brushed past me, walking straight to her room. "Elena," I tried again, my voice trembling. She turned back sharply. "What?" Her tone was sharp, defensive, brittle. "My cards, they're gone," I whispered. Her eyes widened. Just for a second, a flash of fear, a flicker of guilt, a moment where truth stood naked between us. But then she looked away, pretending to be busy, pretending she didn't hear the tremor in my voice. "I don't know," she said too quickly, too practiced, too forced. "Are you sure?" I asked, not because I doubted her, but because I desperately wanted her to tell me the truth, to give me back the daughter I used to know. "Yes." She snapped, but her voice cracked on the last letter, breaking her lie into pieces. I took a deep breath, the kind that fills not just the lungs but the heart, and I whispered, "It's okay." She froze. That one sentence pierced her like a pin through thin paper. She expected anger, shouting, accusations, but all she heard was softness, and sometimes softness feels heavier than rage. The next morning, before I could decide how to handle the situation, the universe made the decision for me. My phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Ma'am," the voice said, firm and serious, "your daughter was caught in a suspicious situation. Please come to the mall." Suspicious, my daughter. My heart dropped so fast it felt like someone had punched me. I rushed to the mall, weaving through crowds, breathless. And then I saw her, sitting on a bench near a glass office door, her hands trembling, her eyes red and swollen. She looked small, scared, broken. Beside her stood the boy she had been sneaking out to meet. I recognized him instantly from the way he stood, hands in pockets, shoulders tense, eyes cold. He wasn't panicked. He didn't look worried. He looked irritated, angry, but not at the situation, at her. When the manager called us inside and explained what happened, the pieces fell into place like a cruel puzzle. She had been withdrawing cash for him, buying expensive things with my card for him, sending him money, covering his debts, paying his bills. Everything she stole wasn't for herself, it was for him. And suddenly, the perfume, the late nights, the trembling hands, the hidden bruises, the lies, they all started to make sense. She wasn't stealing out of greed. She was stealing out of desperation, out of love, out of fear. She was being used, manipulated, controlled, and she didn't even realize it. When the manager asked her to explain before she even opened her mouth, the boy stepped forward and said, "She told me the money was hers." The air froze. Elena's head snapped up in disbelief. "What? No, you said you needed." He cut her off sharply. "Don't drag me into your problems." His words sliced her open. And then he turned and walked away, just like that. No guilt, no hesitation, no backward glance. He left her alone, abandoned, exposed, shattered. My daughter collapsed into tears right there, sobbing so heavily that the sound tore through my soul. I rushed to her, my mother's instinct overpowering every emotion. She clung to me like a child, shaking violently. "Amy, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I just thought he loved me. I thought he needed me. I didn't know what else to do, I didn't know." Her words came out in choked pieces, each one heavier than the last. And in that moment, standing inside a cold, brightly lit office, holding my broken daughter in my arms, I understood something that burned through the heartbreak. She wasn't the thief. She was the victim. She wasn't the betrayer. She was the betrayed. She wasn't the one being watched. He was. Life had been watching him all along. Life had been recording his choices. Life had been preparing consequences for him. But those consequences had landed on my daughter first. And watching her crumble in my arms was the painful turning point that changed everything. When I finally brought her home from the mall that evening, it felt as though the world around us had shifted by a fraction, just enough for everything to feel unfamiliar. The sky was dark, but not completely. A grayish twilight clung to the streets as if even the evening was unsure whether to slip into night. When I finally brought her home from the mall that evening, it felt as though the world around us had shifted by a fraction, just enough for everything to feel unfamiliar. The sky was dark, but not completely. A grayish twilight clung to the streets as if even the evening was unsure whether to slip into night or stay suspended in that in-between. She walked beside me slowly, each step heavy, hesitant, almost dragging her feet like a child too tired to continue. I didn't rush her. I didn't speak. I simply kept pace with her, matching her silence, letting her grief find its own shape. She kept her eyes down the entire walk home, her hands balled tightly in small, trembling fists that she kept hidden inside her sleeves, as though she feared even the air might judge her. When we entered the house, she paused in the doorway as if stepping inside required courage she no longer had. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths, and her lips were pressed together so tightly that the color had drained from them. She sat slowly on the couch, almost collapsing onto it, her shoulders hunched in defeat. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just stared at her hands, the same hands that had once proudly shown me her school drawings, the same hands that had given me her first salary enveloped in a tiny paper card that said, "For Amy." The same hands that now shook from shame, fear, and heartbreak. I stood there for a moment, watching her. She looked so small, so fragile, so far from the confident young woman she pretended to be. She looked like the little girl she used to be, the one who clung to my hand in crowded markets, the one who slept with her head on my chest whenever she had nightmares, the one who trusted me fully because the world was big and she was not. It felt as though time itself had folded backward, pulling her out of her grown-up mistakes and returning her to that frightened, innocent version of herself. She lifted her head slightly, just enough to say my name, and her voice came out as a faint whisper, dry and cracked. "Amy." She swallowed hard. I wasn't thinking. I swear I was. I kept telling myself I'd return the money. I told myself it was only temporary. But he kept asking. He kept saying he needed it. He kept saying I was the only person he trusted. Her voice broke on the word trusted. and she looked away again, as though the walls might offer her some kind of mercy. I walked toward her slowly and sat beside her, close enough for her to feel my presence but not close enough to suffocate the little dignity she still clung to. I didn't touch her. I didn't rush her. I simply sat there, letting her know I was there, letting her decide what she wanted to share. "You don't have to explain," I said softly. But she shook her head. "No, I do. I need to. You deserve to know." And so she told me. Bit by bit, word by painful word, she peeled back the layers of her secret. She told me about the boy, how charming he had been at first, how carefully he had wrapped her in attention, how he made her feel wanted, how he filled every empty space inside her with promises and sweet words until she could no longer tell the difference between love and manipulation. She told me how he began asking for money, not all at once, but in small, harmless-sounding ways. "Just this once. Just help me today. You know I'm struggling. You're the only one I can rely on." He said these things so gently at first, and she, lonely, hopeful, innocent, believed him. And every time she hesitated, he played with her fears. He threatened to walk away. He made her feel guilty. He made her believe she would lose him if she didn't pay. Then she reached the part that crushed me more than the theft itself. She told me about the night she entered my room. "I stood there shaking," she said, her voice barely more than breath. "I told myself you would understand. I told myself I'd pay you back before you even noticed. I told myself I was helping someone who needed me." She paused, and for a long moment, she didn't speak at all. When she finally continued, her voice was trembling so hard the words almost didn't come out. "He promised me we would move in together. He promised me a future." I closed my eyes. Ah, promises, the softest knives. The easiest way to break a heart. The easiest way to drain a soul. People underestimate words. They think wounds only come from actions, but sometimes it's the promises that cut deepest because they wound the hope inside you. But I didn't tell her she was foolish. I didn't tell her she disappointed me. I didn't tell her she broke my trust. There was no need. She already knew. She was drowning in her own regret. She was suffocating under the weight of her own choices. What she needed now was not judgment. What she needed was not punishment. What she needed was a mother. So I placed my hand gently over hers, feeling her fingers flinch with shame, and I whispered the only words she could survive in that moment. "I'm here. We'll fix this." And that was enough to break her all over again. She leaned into me, crying so quietly that her tears soaked into my shoulder without a sound. She clung to me as though she was afraid I might leave too, afraid I might walk away the way he did, afraid she might lose the only person who had never abandoned her. Days passed in a strange, heavy silence. She barely left her room. She didn't touch her phone except to turn it face down whenever it vibrated. She ate little. She didn't look in the mirror. She didn't even sit beside me the way she used to. She kept herself tucked away as if hiding from the world would erase what happened. I let her be. Healing has its own pace. Shame has its own weight. Regret has its own silence. Then one morning, when the sun was barely rising and the house still felt half asleep, she came into the kitchen. Her face was pale, but her eyes held a new kind of determination, fragile but real. She stood there, fingers trembling, and said, "Amy, I want to make things right. I want to start over." And she did. Not in big dramatic ways, not overnight, not with grand gestures, but slowly, carefully, painfully, one small step at a time. She applied for a part-time job and got one. She returned whatever amount she could each month, even though I had never asked her to pay me back. She cut ties with the friends who encouraged her wrong behaviors. She blocked the boy permanently, not just from her phone, but from her life, her thoughts, her heart. But the biggest, most beautiful change didn't happen outside. It happened at home. It happened between us. She began spending time with me again. She helped me cook. She helped me clean. She asked about my day. She called me Amy with a softness I hadn't heard in years. And slowly, without either of us planning it, the distance between us shrank. The silence filled with conversation. The guilt softened into gratitude. One evening, as we were folding laundry together, the gentle rhythm of the moment lulled us into a comfortable quiet. Then she stopped, a towel half folded in her hands, and looked at me. "You didn't shout at me," she said quietly. "When you should have, why?"
I smiled. Because the world was already punishing you, I replied. I didn't want to add to it. Her eyes welled with tears again, but this time they were softer. She leaned her head on my shoulder, just the way she used to when she was small. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know, I said softly, and I forgive you. Forgiveness does not erase pain. Forgiveness does not rewrite the past. Forgiveness does not magically restore trust in a single breath, but forgiveness makes space for healing. And healing, no matter how slow, no matter how fragile, grows like a tender plant in the quiet corners of a home. Months have passed since that day, and when I look at her now, I no longer see the girl who stole from me. I no longer see the mistakes she made. I no longer see the shadows of the boy who used her or the shame she once carried like a burden across her shoulders. Today, I see the woman who learned. I see the daughter who returned. I see the child who finally understood the weight of a mother's heart. And if I'm honest, truly honest, a part of me is grateful for the storm we walked through together. Because sometimes life breaks us only to rebuild us stronger. Sometimes a wound opens only to let light in. And sometimes betrayal becomes the very thing that brings a child back into her mother's arms. Sometimes pain is the beginning of love finding its way home again.